Good morning. It looks like the 10 o'clock hour has arrived, so we welcome you to our first featured virtual event for spring 2021, hosted by the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. I am Dr. Heather Perfetti, President of the Commission, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Scott Jasik, Editor of Inside Higher Ed, as our featured speaker. Before I invite Scott in to talk about his top 10 issues in higher education, I have a few housekeeping items. At the conclusion of his remarks, Scott is looking forward to answering your questions and will try to get through as many of them as possible. In order to submit a question, please use the Q&A function found on your screen. While we certainly miss seeing everyone in person, the Commission has unveiled a robust and diverse schedule of virtual events this spring. As I already noted, today marks the first of our featured virtual events. Two others that we are looking forward to includes a panel of Chief Financial Officers, as well as Terry Hartle at the American Council on Education. In addition, the Commission has also scheduled a package of 8 sessions in our Lessons Learned webinar series for a nominal fee, as well as a series of training webinars that are free to our member institutions. I know this slide is busy and hard to read, but please visit our webpage at msche.org/events to learn more and to get registered. And finally, if you are not already doing so, please follow us on social media through Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube using @MSCHE.org. If you are already following us, we thank you. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Scott Jasik, Editor of Inside Higher Ed. Given the turbulence and quick pace of the changing higher education landscape, if you are like me, Inside Higher Ed is a daily must read. Scott is one of the 3 founders of Inside Higher Ed, and along with Doug Lederman, he leads the editorial operations of Inside Higher Ed, overseeing news content, opinion pieces, career advice, blogs, and other features. If anyone in the media understands our commission and its institutions, it is Scott, who grew up in Rochester, New York, graduated from Cornell University, and currently resides in Washington, D.C. It is my privilege to be here this morning to introduce Scott. And Scott, I thank you tremendously for joining us. I now turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thank you to all of you for being here today. I can't see you in a literal way, but I know you're there, and it makes a big difference to stay in touch, to do things like this, even if it's not ideal situation for meeting and greeting people. The part of meetings that I miss the most is when people would come up to me afterwards and then tell me a tip for a story. So I hope you'll email me or stay in touch because I still want that interaction. And next year, maybe we'll be in person again. But it's been a long year. First of all, I wanted to tell you about this list. Why we have this is courtesy of, in some ways, of the Education Writers Association. I am a longtime EWA member. It's an organization that helps journalists cover education. And I have been doing now for a number of years a list at their meeting. My list evolves during the year, so this is quite different from the May list that I gave to them. But it's a useful way to think about higher education and what's important and what's really important in the months ahead, as well as looking back. I do want your questions, and please feel free to ask them at any time. I think I will see them on my screen, so please do ask. And I also have a confession to make. I came up with 11 issues, not 10. I hope you'll forgive me for that. But this morning, a new issue occurred to me that I decided to add to the list. The first issue I want to talk about as a big issue is the arrival of COVID and colleges reacting to the pandemic in its initial forms. Think back a year ago. We were just learning about COVID. It wasn't yet a force in the Middle States region. But COVID was already present in China, and I believe the first cases were showing up in Seattle. And then since then, we have discovered other cases that weren't initially identified as COVID. It is amazing to think that it's a year that we've had COVID. And in March, we'll have a year in which the whole country has been in, pandemic mode. And my first issue is the arrival of COVID and the way colleges responded to it. And, you may think, well, I know how colleges responded. Colleges very quickly said, it's dangerous to be around. And please go home. But I want to focus on a part of that I don't think has gotten enough attention. Colleges reacted very quickly. How many times have you heard it said that colleges can't do anything quickly? Well, in fact, they can, and they did. It's debatable whether, actually, I don't think it's debatable. It's debatable whether colleges did it the exact right way, but colleges had to shut down, had to shift online. Now, much has been made of the fact that when they shifted online, they weren't exactly the best online courses, but they were, they did it. And I really think colleges deserve a lot of credit for what they did in the last spring to make it possible for students to come back now or not come back now, but for students to have that choice. It's really quite amazing. And so next time somebody tells you colleges don't do anything quickly, it's worth remembering, because most colleges acted within days of COVID arriving. And it's quite remarkable. Issue 2 was the decisions to stay open or not open in the fall. Colleges quickly went home, and then they had to figure out what to do in the fall. Some colleges opened up. Some colleges were all online. Many colleges were a combination. And what's interesting here are a few things. One is I would really pay attention to the combination colleges. I would argue that many of them are effectively online institutions only. I was talking to somebody yesterday at a Middle States institution I won't name, who said, oh, well, he's on campus and all of his classes as a student are online. And that is the case for many students. And it raises interesting questions about room and board expenses, about why you want students on campus. Now, I would agree that the residential experience is incredibly important for students. But it does raise interesting questions. If you are taking all your classes online, well, why are you on campus if your college encouraged you to be? And I think those are continuing into the spring. Issue 3, some colleges that have reopened have done quite well, and others have faltered. Think back to the spring, to the beginning of the fall, when UNC Chapel Hill opened and then shut quickly. NC State did the same. It was a very dramatic illustration of the fact that many students may understand COVID, but weren't willing to follow the rules. And the colleges quickly had many COVID infections, and they had to close. Other colleges, notably these are in the Sacs region, managed to stay open despite more than 1,000 students getting COVID. This is really quite remarkable. Many colleges said that, well, college students are unlikely to die if they get COVID. That is true, certainly, but college students have died from COVID. And it's important to remember, and also we don't know yet the long-term impact. But some colleges have done very well. Among them, historically Black colleges. I think that historically Black colleges did well because many of their students didn't really see a viable way to leave campus and still be engaged. Online education is great, and many of you do it regularly, but it requires good online access and a quiet place to study. And many historically Black college students don't have that. Many community college students also don't have that. But and at the historically Black colleges, we've noticed a trend of many of them doing very well and getting their students to follow the rules. And that's been interesting. Christian colleges have also been very good and very effective at holding on to their students. I think that in that case, it may be because there's no drinking at some of those schools. There's no fraternities at some of those schools. And so it's a different environment. But they have managed to function despite the threats of the disease. Issue 4, distribution of funds. This is an extremely important issue. Now it's being debated in Congress again. But at the time, at the beginning, there was a first round of legislation to help colleges, a second round, and then now there's going to be a Biden round. In the first round, the interesting issue that came up wasn't the total amount of money that they got, but was the issue of why should I give my money to support a college that has a mega endowment? And all of the criticism was of Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, which I'm not speaking to today, but there are colleges in middle states with large endowments. And that is a tough question for colleges. To speak, to get a large endowment is a huge task. And anyone with any size endowment knows that the endowment isn't free money. It's money for a specific purpose. And the colleges that have large endowments don't have the rights to just use them however they would like. Nonetheless, Harvard, Yale, and Stanford did voluntarily remove themselves from the legislation. And I think that's an issue we're going to see coming up again. The other thing about the first funds for higher education, the formula that it was given really hurt community colleges, and really dramatically hurt community colleges because they enroll students, but they are not first-time full-time students. It's the same thing with the graduation rates. We force them to compete in a graduation rate that is irrelevant, frankly, to most community colleges. And so it's worth remembering those things from the first go round and seeing which of them will be fixed in this go round. The other thing about the latest version, it looks like it is going to come with pretty much only Democratic votes. And that is, on the one hand, to get it through. As an appropriations bill, they will be able to get it through if the Democrats hold together, and that includes Kamala Harris breaking a tie in the Senate. And they may even add on to the Biden bill. Biden proposed $35 billion for colleges. The House version is going to be marked up today, supposedly with $40 billion. And that's great, but please remember that colleges have lost so much money, which I'll get to later, that even if they get that all, it will not make up the difference for what they lost. And it's worth thinking about. Private colleges are very worried about the Biden bill, which did say it was only for public colleges and minority serving institutions. And they are working to change that to also include private colleges. Issue 5, the spring semester and the eventual returns to normalcy. But what is normalcy? I would say we are not back to normal, but many colleges have opened for the spring semester, and many more are just opening now because they delayed the start of their year. In Pennsylvania, the education secretary basically asked all the colleges, public and private, to delay opening from early January because of the record highs we are seeing in COVID infection rates spreading throughout the country. And even if your students are safe on campus, if your students are traveling any distance, they are being exposed to people probably with COVID. So it's very awkward for colleges that very much want to get their students back but can't. And I would say, and so some colleges are continuing in all online mode. I think, and the colleges that have students back are mainly going with the many classes online or all classes online. So I think it will be at least the fall before anything resembling true normalcy comes back. And I also, and I'm afraid I will be unpopular for saying this, but I don't think it's a given that they're going to be back in the fall. Looking at the pace of vaccines being given, it's going to have to pick up for them to truly be viable in the fall. Plus, most students, or all students under 18, there's been no testing on. So it is unclear whether they would get it. So normalcy is having a new name to it. Issue 6, community colleges and the impact on community colleges. I know that we have a lot of community college people, I hope, in the audience. And community colleges are great institutions. They educate students who are not necessarily welcomed at other institutions. They serve their communities so closely, so carefully. But the pandemic has been a disaster for community colleges. Many community colleges lost students to the pandemic, not saying they died, but they didn't come back this fall. And why didn't they come back? There are various theories. One theory is that the students didn't really like online education, which many colleges were forced to teach it. Now, why didn't they like online education? I'm not somebody who believes that community college students are less able than four-year college students to get online education. But I do believe that it's those issues of access and money that I was talking about with the historically Black colleges. Community colleges have students who need the computer centers that you operate. They need your parking lots. In the fall, many community colleges were putting their Wi-Fi to work in their parking lots, and students were driving to campus and hanging out and doing their classwork. Now, that's not an ideal way to do it, but it's something. Then those community colleges were actually giving their students an option. And the other reason many community college students aren't back is they face true desperation for making this work for them. Community college students, you look at the layoffs. I don't mean by the community colleges, I mean layoffs in your community. Probably hit community college students worse than four-year college students. All of those service jobs that were lost. It is really terrible. And many community college students feel that if they can just hold on to one thing, it needs to be a job. And you may disagree with that. And frankly, I disagree with that if you can afford to eat. But it's a prevailing view among many community colleges. And it's really hurting them terribly. It will add up, particularly in this year's legislative sessions. Many of the community college formulas for funding are based on enrollment. So you see the automatic double impact. I think that community colleges are going to be really hurt. And I sort of beg four-year colleges and universities need to be aware of this. Four-year colleges, don't say, oh, well, we're lucky we avoided it. Think about who's not going to be transferring to your institution because they're not at a community college. And to the extent you can be generous, please encourage your states to consider fully the problems of community colleges, which are not their own making, and to try to be more supportive of that. Issue 7, the future of international students. This is another area in which the colleges are really hurting. Now, but not all colleges are hurting. Places like Penn got lots of applicants because their students in the United States who can apply, and they're continuing students, and they want to be there. But the overall numbers are down 43% for new students this year in the country, and which means a 16% decline in the number of total international students. Now, the reason that the total international student number is better than the new student number is because many programs are for longer than a year. And so that's great because colleges can hold on to those students, but that number is going to look worse next year. And I would encourage you to really plan for it. Post the 2008 recession, most colleges started recruiting many more international students as undergraduates. This is important to think about. Since World War II, colleges recruited international students as graduate students and generally paid their way. But the students who were recruited post 2008 recession are generally paying their own way, and they are at every type of institution. This loss is an important financial loss and also an important educational loss. Many of your colleges are enrolling students who have never been outside the United States, and their chance to interact with people is limited. And so personally, I think it's going to be really important what happens for international students. International students will come back when they can, but look at the country right now. Look at our COVID rates. Would you imagine yourself as a parent in China? Would you want your child to come to the United States? Until we have COVID under control, there are going to be problems for international students. And now with Biden, we have a president who wants international students and who is going to say the right things. But it's not the same, and Biden can't snap his fingers and make it magically better. Issue 8, and this is a new issue, is projections of how much money colleges will lose because of the pandemic. There is a projection that we have on our site today that colleges will lose $183 billion. $183 billion. Think about that. $74 billion is lost revenue from the states this year, and other, plus they have more expenses. They lost students, they lost some tuition. It adds up in a huge way. How colleges will deal with this is their major challenge, particularly how they will deal with legislatures. The states cannot afford most of what the colleges want, and whether colleges will get treated well or poorly is all relative. And I think the colleges are going to really be forced to think about their futures and what they're doing. Look at what's going on in the Pennsylvania state system. Now, the MSCHE had problems before the pandemic, and it's important not to say that the pandemic resulted in those plans that are moving ahead. But the fact is, states are going to have to consider major changes to deal with their huge financial losses. This is particularly the case, and this is true in a number of the middle states, if you are losing enrollment. Losing enrollment in this environment is just going to be deadly, frankly. Now I have three non-COVID issues to discuss. The first is the election of President Biden and the Biden first few weeks, and it will soon grow into a longer period of time. Most colleges were very happy about President Biden, and for good reason. There are people who wish for more of an intellectual president, but I think they are doing great with Biden. Biden truly understands what education is about. He gives speeches about it with regularity. He talks about it with regularity. He is going to look out for colleges. Now, will he give them everything that they want? Well, no, he won't. But you genuinely have a president who cares about colleges. I would also note the role of Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady. She teaches at a Virginia community college. She has taught always at community colleges. You cannot imagine the impact this will have. This means that the President of the United States every night is hearing about a community college. That's pretty amazing. And she has been an outspoken supporter of his plan to give free community college and some four-year colleges as well. And she's going to go to bat for it. I think having this combination of the two is great for higher ed. Unfortunately, it's in this terrible time, but it's going to be great for higher ed. Now, there's one part of Biden that you may also like, but that you may not like. Biden will be appointing people to the NLRB. He'll be supervising OSHA and other agencies. In those areas, he is going to be more sympathetic to grad student unions, to private college unions, to other forms of protecting employees. You may like that yourselves, but the colleges, by and large, have preferred President Trump's appointees. Now, the NLRB will not change radically overnight because of the way the members are appointed, but it will change. Issue 2, issue 10 on my overall list is the Black Lives Matter movement and higher education. Very quickly in the summer and last summer, we lost an important moral stature. The fact is that white police officers kill innocent Black people. Doesn't mean they're all racist. Doesn't mean that no Black person deserves to be caught by the police. But the fact is, this didn't start last summer. This has been in our history for all time. And last summer, it really took off in a way that it hadn't previously. Colleges are in some ways fortunate. It took off at a time that colleges were not in operation, there were no students. And even in the fall, when some students came back, there have been very few protests on campus. Not because students didn't want to protest, but because they couldn't protest safely. Eventually that will come back. But in this period when students have been on campus, a major issue has been the Black students. And I think that their situation continues to bother many people, myself included. Now, what are the issues? Many colleges moved quickly to remove the names of buildings that honored people who were slaveholders or who took certain racist positions. And don't assume that because you are not, well, actually your states are mixed, but because all of your states didn't have slavery, do not assume that it doesn't mean you don't have buildings that that people will dislike because of their names. The greater issue, though, and I don't mean to dismiss the building names issue, the greater issue is how people are treated today. And I think the fact is that most Black students do not feel there's anything resembling real equality on campuses, and they are going to be vocal about demanding progress on that. And that issue is directly contradictory to my last issue, which is affirmative action and potentially going to the Supreme Court. The case is the Harvard case, and Harvard has won that case both in the district court level and at the appeals court level. A case against Yale by the Justice Department was withdrawn. And so everyone's people are very happy about that. There's another case that is brewing at UNC Chapel Hill. The bottom line on affirmative action is, I want to make 2 points. One is, again, it affects you all. Many of you may feel that that your admissions policies are so different from Harvard that, well, what's it going to matter? But if Harvard loses its case, Harvard is not the only place that will be affected. Every college that has scholarships that consider race and ethnicity or gender, that has summer programs for minority students, that will all be affected too. So you will be affected. And then the other thing I want to say is that no one knows what the Supreme Court will do. But the Supreme Court is different from the Supreme Court that upheld affirmative action at the University of Texas and the University of Michigan. And personally, I think that Trump picked justices who are likely to, at the very least, have a tougher standard for colleges to meet. This is going to be a huge issue, and it really dovetails with the fact that many of your Black students aren't happy to start with. So I've run through my issues. I see we have some questions in, and I'm going to take them and get to them. So thank you very much. The first question is, my larger concern was that I, like many others, didn't realize early enough how quickly COVID would spread throughout the world and the devastating impact that it would have on institutions and students. Why did I think the virus would not be our problem? How can we better anticipate and prepare for the global trends and beyond higher education, along with a larger impact? It's a great question. And the answer, I can't give you I can't give you a definite answer, but I can tell you a few things. One is the change in administration. Biden has restored the office that was focused on trends in health abroad that could affect the United States. And he's made it a major emphasis. Think about the first thing that the first things that Trump said about the virus. He called it the Chinese virus. And it didn't come just from China. It came to the United States from Europe and from Asia. And we are a global world. We fly, we fly abroad. And I don't want to say that every disease will necessarily affect us, but every disease could affect us. And personally, I think that it is unrealistic to assume that that anything happening abroad will not affect the United States. Now, how much, who knows? But I do think they will affect the United States, and we have to think along those lines. Question 2, according to NICU, private nonprofit colleges and universities are included equally in a House committee proposal for the next round of COVID-19. I am not surprised, and that's something to watch. I would, and one theory I have heard about why private colleges, except for minority serving institutions, were left out is that that issue of the institutions that are wealthy institutions. If the wealthiest institutions are excluded, and the reality is most private colleges do not have budgets anything like Harvard's, that's just one way to deal with it. But we're covering that is being marked up today. The next question, although the pandemic and its impacts are the main issues facing higher education, do universities, colleges have a responsibility to prepare its students to be critical and engaged citizens? It is interesting to note the varied responses of college presidents to the storming of the Capitol building, and internationally, universities are being confronted by authoritarian rulers and extreme nationalism. I don't want to give you the easy answer is yes, of course colleges need to prepare critical and engaged citizens. But I need to stop and think what's going on in our society in higher education. How many of our colleges are under pressure to add programs that just are job training, or certificate programs that are just job training? And the gen ed is an important part of every program, I would say, including at community colleges. And to do that well, it's important, to talk about critical and engaged citizens. We need to talk about, well, what do we expect at community colleges? What do we expect at a four-year liberal arts college? They may not look the same, but how are we going to answer this question for them? Personally, I hope we answer with a yes, but it's going to require people to look very differently and to create different kinds of programs. But even in a short-term certificate program, there can be some programs that do attempt to teach that work. Thank you for addressing community colleges. A question: how do you think community colleges would be able to attract back students? There's been a great push to invest in the adult and continuing ed job training programs, but how can you attract students who may be interested in a path to a four-year degree, since full-time equivalent factors in matriculated students, not continuing ed students? So for students who want a path, to me, the obvious thing that they should go for is a path from community college to four-year college, not, a transfer articulation path. Many community colleges have created these, many others are trying. They need to do it immediately because these students want that path to exist. And you can say, well, you can go on our page and look. Students aren't going to go on your page and look. It's got to be very clear, and it's got to be a path that outlines exactly what you're taking and exactly the credits you're going to get at the four-year college. Anything less than that is not going to work, or is going to result in community college students not feeling ripped off when they go to a four-year college and are told, well, we're only giving you 1 year's credit, not 2 years credits. So that is the best way, I think. And I do think that the students will be back, but you need to get out that message. Next question is, private colleges and public colleges have competing interests. So I do not understand why private, non-minority serving institution colleges need federal funding. They have chosen a private model out of a sense of inherent superiority over public institutions and minority serving institutions. So why should taxpayers have to pay for that? I guess it's good that you are all watching this in your homes or offices and are not together, because that question would prompt quite a reaction. Look, there are some private colleges that are extremely wealthy. The most famous private colleges are wealthy. There are also private colleges that are religious. But the private colleges that are religious in the Middle States region are primarily institutions that choose to serve students that are not of their faith. The minority, the private colleges, how much they should get and how they should get it is a matter for states to figure out. But the reality is, in the Middle States region, if New York's private colleges didn't exist, SUNY and CUNY would be a mess, because you'd all have to go there, or many students would have to go there. And that is true throughout your region. And so and many private colleges care deeply about low-income students, care deeply about their communities. So I don't think it is quite as this questioner thought. But this attitude of the questioner is widely held. And I would encourage those of you at private colleges to speak to it directly. A new question: what have colleges and universities learned about the cost of value of the college experience, given that the experience was forced to change during the pandemic? It's a really good question. They've learned many things. At many colleges, like the ones I mentioned that are bringing students back, they've learned that it's part of the most important part of the college experience is not living at home with your parents. That may seem silly, but that is what many students want to get. And the thing is, that's not higher education at its best. When you think about what goes on at colleges, We are talking about the experience that people have of truly learning from one another late night in the dorms or off campus. We're talking about socializing too. We are talking about lots of things that are not part of your official curricula. And most of them have been abandoned. And I think colleges are going to need to be very careful to bring them back at an appropriate time that will help. But I think colleges have to think differently. Also, there's some interesting lawsuits going on right now, primarily not in your region, over the tuition that should be refunded. If you say an important part of our experience is blah, 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 which goes on outside of the classroom, and that's not going on, that raises some difficult questions. Okay, here's a question. Will gainful employment return, and will the formula for it change? The formula back then did not account for the possibility that some graduates prefer to be their own business owners, not working for somebody. I don't know that the exact formula will return. Gainful employment was taken away in part because of the Trump administration and in part because the courts ruled against parts of gainful. I would suspect that under the Biden administration, the Education Department will return a portion of gainful employment. But I don't expect it to be exactly the way it was under the Obama administration. I suspect it will change somewhat, perhaps on this issue that you raised, perhaps on other issues. They will come back. And generally, that's what will happen in the for-profit administration. Question, how do you think colleges and universities will restructure majors, departments, school organization as a result of losing so much money through COVID? Well, I mean, if you were together right today, you could get the answer to that by talking to your colleagues. Look, every college is affected, the wealthy and the non-wealthy alike. The non-wealthy are forced to do things that immediately that would that other colleges would prefer not to do. But what we are seeing is layoffs, particularly of the adjuncts, but plenty of layoffs of tenure track and tenured professors. We are seeing majors combined and departments combined and schools combined. Colleges are saying that they have no choice. And that will be the norm at many universities. It's very sad to watch, but it is. And also, it's something that was going on before the COVID hit, but it has been accelerated by COVID. You did not mention the impact of the insurrection. True. The impact of the insurrection, it's too, in some ways it's too broad. But some of the ways that it affects higher education, in my opinion, it points to the need that was raised in an earlier question to talk about what it means to be a good citizen today, what it means to be supportive of democracy, what it means to get, and what it means when you will have a group of people who lost an election and then assume they can get what they want by taking over Congress. I think that the impact of the insurrection in many ways will tell, well, it's going to be very interesting. President Trump's trial starts today. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether the Republicans let him off the hook. I hope not, but I think it may well happen. Do you have any thoughts on how COVID-19 has impacted colleges were already online? So it's a great time to be a college that's already online. And generally, those colleges are doing well. Not everyone, but generally they are doing well. Why? Because people want those colleges. Those colleges know how to teach online. Look, teaching a course online is not taking a lecture class and making a recording of it. It's interacting in different ways. It's using the time in different ways. Online colleges know that already. And so they are doing quite well. Now they will have some new competition, but I think they're doing well, and largely are not affected in the same ways that other colleges are. Apologies if I missed this, but are there indications of what we'll see, whether we'll see changes in Title IX beyond the revocation of the DeVos guidance? I'm not sure exactly what we will see, but I suspect we will see pretty close adherence to the Obama era guidance, which after all was done by then Vice President Biden, minus perhaps the influence of the courts. It's important to remember that it was not just a political battle over the DeVos guidance, but it was a legal battle. And the courts have ruled in ways that have hurt efforts to go after the men who do these things. So I suspect there'll be minor differences. What role will for-profit colleges play in further challenging enrollment at two-year colleges? They will play a huge role. Look, for-profits are very nimble, are able quickly to create new programs, and some of those are good programs. It's unfair to say that every for-profit program is a bad program. Although they do have their share of bad programs. But I think what they will be doing in challenging enrollment is simply being that they exist. And by existing, they have the power to to create another model. Now, for community colleges, this creates the issue of, well, you don't market the way the for-profits do. Well, perhaps you need to, because if you don't, the for-profits that cost much more than you will get your students. It's that simple. Here's another question. The use of Zoom was a game changer for many students and faculty. It incorporated face-to-face contact that traditional online did not provide. It has had a useful, positive effect, especially at community colleges. Well, I mean, first of all, I would say that a good online program did have a not necessarily Zoom, but had a Zoom-like capabilities, and they should have the capabilities that we are enjoying today to enjoy. You know, I hear about Zoom from faculty members who love it and hate it. They love it in that it enables them to interact with their students, but they hate it because they would rather be in person, and who can blame them? And so I suspect when I go back to having one Zoom conference call a day instead of 5 or 6, I will also be a fan of Zoom. Right now, to be honest, I'm waiting to not use it again, but that's just me. Given the changes you've noted, what new skills, abilities must college leaders possess? Really good question. the top skill I would say that wasn't needed before, change management. To know what changes you need, to seek out the faculty, the other people who are engaged in your communities, and to make it possible to develop a plan and to carry it out. I think that to do that well and to do that quickly is an immense skill. I think that shared governance gets trashed a lot during pandemic because people say, oh, well, you don't have time for that. Well, I would say you do have time for that, but you might have to not have time to do it in the same formats that you've done it. Let's see here. What ingenious things do you see institutions doing to capitalize on potential changes provided by COVID responses that can help institutions emerge stronger from this pandemic? Excuse me, I just in some ways, I want to go back to the parking lots that community colleges are using to be their internet access centers. Because in one way, that's not ingenious. It's like, that's all you do. You're opening up your parking lot and making sure your Wi-Fi works. But it is ingenious in that it's truly looking at what do the students need and what can the college provide. And I think it's in those services that colleges need to think more. Colleges need to provide, in some cases, students for food. It was one thing in a campus that was active to say, oh, well, we created a food bank. It's a different situation if you have gone to an all online community. How can you do something like that quickly? Let's see. Why do you think the narrative persists that the minority students, especially those who are allowed differential application considerations, are somehow less qualified to succeed, especially the data do not support this? Similarly, why do you think people don't raise questions when these top-tiered universities have a racial demographic that is not representative of college-age students in the country? This is going to be my last question. I think that for students, at many colleges, I truly think it's a matter of people need to shout. People need to say, hey, we're here, we matter. And then they can hope to be listened to. It is absolutely true that minority students can succeed at any institution, but they do have needs that need to be met, and colleges need to do that. I think I am just about done. So I want to turn it back over to Heather.
Great. Thank you, Scott, so much. And I want to, on behalf of the commission, thank you for being with us today and for all that you and your team contribute to the higher education community. I know if we were together, you would hear the applause because I'm seeing the many positive comments coming through the chat. So please know that we appreciate your remarks through this informative and thought-provoking featured virtual event. And it was a great way for us to kick off that series. And we appreciate you for taking the time to answer these important questions coming in from our attendees. I know everyone's asking about the recording, so I want to assure everyone that they will be getting a link to the recording of the event as well. To all of our attendees, we certainly want to thank you for joining us and for sharing your questions with Scott. Please do remember Please do remember to visit msche.org/events to register for our upcoming Spring 2021 webinars, which include the launch of our Lessons Learned webinar series, which kicks off on February 12th. I also want to thank my amazing staff who assist with bringing these events to all of our constituents. Thank you for your dedication and all that you have done behind the scenes. On behalf of Scott and on behalf of our entire commission, I thank you for joining us. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope that you continue to remain safe. Thank you.